Sit down. Welcome, everyone, to the Finance and Audit Committee agenda meeting Thursday, October 16th, 2025. We would like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Nkapa and Silk people. Public input, is there any? No, there is not. Adoption of minutes, Finance and Audit Committee meeting minutes, January 16th, 2025. Recommendation that the minutes of the Finance and Audit Committee meeting held on January 16th, 2025 be adopted. Councillor Hogan, Councillor Etchart, any questions, errors, or omissions? All those in favor? Oh, sorry. Sure.
3.1 says Finance and Audit Committee meeting minutes from March 1st, 2022 be adopted. That seems
So I think what happens with that, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, that is the original date that was done, and then we touched on it. So that goes back. Am I right here or am I wrong here? I'll need your mic on. CFO?
So I believe that was adopting minutes from a previous cycle.
I know, but it's 3 years.
But if there hasn't been a meeting, you got to remember, some of these committees were not formed.
I thought there's always been
No.
Finance and Audit Committee. Until our last one, we don't have one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, some of these committees we formed. Okay. Thank you for that interruption. All those in favor? Opposed, carried. Thank you. But good point. Good point. We will move right to 6.1, 2026 to 2030 financial plan. Mr. Kevin Naganini, Director of Finance and HR, to present. Kevin, over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we've already kicked off the budgeting process with council, and this is now an opportunity to engage on content as we move towards the fall and budget presentations. So this may include an opportunity to direct staff as it relates to long-term strategic management of our debt, where we may want to steepen the curve in terms of our savings rates, areas where council would like to have some level of service conversation with staff as we work through the budgeting presentation. So for example, the summer camp service offering is an example where we're aware that that needs to come to council as part of the budget presentations. This is an opportunity to identify any other areas that you'd like to hear about, and then strategic capital priorities that weren't in last year's 2025 to 2029 financial plan. So for example, Councillor Charney discussed the senior center ceiling at last night's council meeting 2 nights ago. That would be an example of something that you might want to bring forward for staff to be aware of, to ensure that it gets included in the conversations for this year. And we'll also talk a little bit about any new risks that have been identified over and above the ones that we normally carry. So I do have a few things to say about our Class 2 utility revenue and a bit of a headwind there for the city. So we can get it right started. I wanted to start the conversation today with some grounding on where we're at in terms of debt, and that may inform some decisions that need to be made by council in terms of whether the KenGuard project stays in the financial plan or not. And it may also help in terms of making some of the savings decisions, given the impact that it may have if we found ourselves in an extreme scenario where we're borrowing for critical infrastructure priorities and what that taxation impact would be. So what I thought I would do is start by showing where we were at year-end 2024. 2024 had a lot of one-time or non-recurring type activities. And so I have made some adjustments in terms of our borrowing limit versus what the province officially would hold on file for us today. So lots of non-recurring activities as it relates to finalizing all of the flood insurance projects, housing rental revenue for the transitional housing program, some of the funds for Exit 286 over and above the borrowing limit. All of those are one-time revenues that will ultimately be stripped away from future borrowing limits. So I've tried to proxy where we're actually at in terms of debt room. So on an adjusted basis, we would say approximately 3.8 million in ability to service annual debt going forward. Any questions on where we are today in terms of our borrowing cap?
Oh, here we go. Councillor Etchart.
I was looking at in the revenues, what is class 4 revenues?
So that's revenue from major industry. And so what the province does, given that there's risks around that, they adjust out your actual class 4 revenue from things like sawmills and paper mills, etc. And they revalue what that revenue would be as if the provincial average mill rate was applied to that assessed value.
Also, instead of having like industrial class 7 or whatever, residential R1 or in the classes?
No, so what it's saying is they want to risk manage borrowing associated with revenue from major industrial activity. So if the mill is running in a community, all is well, but there's always that risk that that revenue could go away. And so what they do is they remove your actual revenue from major industrial activity like a sawmill. They revalue it based on a provincial average mill rate such that you're really only able to borrow based on a more normalized or risk adjusted
BC average.
property tax revenue for class 4. Does that make sense?
I think so.
They're just trying to, I think, essentially manage the risk that a mill might close and then you don't have that taxation revenue to fund your debt payments. So they remove what you've actually recognized as revenue and given you partial credit back towards your borrowing room to help manage the risk that major industry may leave a community and you may find yourself struggling to make those debt payments. So they try and intervene up front in terms of that cap on the borrowing room. That's my understanding. I'm not speaking on behalf of the province, but that's what I understand that adjustment.
Councillor Egan.
Yeah, so when you say less class 4 revenues regarding those industry we're talking about, they're taking away what it would have been, and then they add the capped version of it?
Correct. So they
Okay.
remove what we actually recognized as class 4 revenue and gave us a partial credit back.
Okay. And then my other question is near the bottom, your bottom paragraph on that page says for both parcels at exit 286 needs to be replaced with a principal and interest proxy for the remaining parcel?
So this is based on 2024, and during 2024, we would have had short-term borrowing for both parcels at the time. We now
That was for infrastructure?
So that was for the water and sewer infrastructure.
Mhm.
And so we would have only been making interest payments given that it was short-term borrowing. Now we have one parcel that has paid their borrowing obligation and we're going to go to long-term debt for the remaining parcel, but it'll be both principal and interest. So I've tried to adjust from a world in which 2024 we were paying interest only on both parcels to a world in which we're paying interest and principal on one parcel, if that makes sense.
Okay, so then that's an extra 3.8 million that we are paying?
No,
or
I've
that-
adjusted 39,000 just in terms of annual servicing cost.
Okay,
Now, as we've discussed in other meetings, we will have a parcel tax revenue that funds that borrowing obligation, but for presentation purposes, I wanted it to be as accurate as possible.
okay, I just wanted to see where they all fit in together.
Certainly.
Thanks.
Councillor Richard, anything else?
No, that's right.
Anyone else?
So since we first started conversations in the 2023 budgeting cycle, we identified that the wastewater treatment plant currently wasn't tenable from a funding perspective. So we removed the capital associated with the plant out of the plan on the condition that we begin to save parcel tax and reserves towards ultimately funding its replacement. So it's primarily had the highest call on our long-term borrowing capacity, other than the fire trucks that we're required to replace here in the near term. We were notified in September that the KenGuard well is going to cost significantly more than what we had premised in prior year plan. So we had a notional construction cost of about $7.5 million, that we would assume a $5 million grant. And then we would take both out of the water and gas tax reserve to fund the remaining $7.5 million. The two treatment options that came forward have costs in excess of 20 million. In conversation with the director, we believe that as contingencies and engineering estimates true up, that will come down to something closer to 20 million, but it's not something that we can fund as it stands today, given that the water reserve balance was zero starting in 2023, and we've just started saving for the last 2 years. So that is one area where council will need to provide direction to staff on whether or not that project stays in the plan with a debt assumption, whether or not we decide to increase our savings rate for a longer period of time to try and mitigate some of that debt. Ultimately, we'll be looking for direction on what happens with that project as it relates to the 26 to 30 financial plan.
Just a quick question to CAO. And so we're talking $20 million. Are we talking a gigantic building there, or what are we? Because I understand we have to do something with the water. I'm just trying to figure out what costs $20 million if it's not a giant building. I'm just curious, because this is not my field, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Yes, there's a building component to this. We've got some general sketch ideas of what that looks like, which is somewhere in the 4 times the size of the shed that's up there now to accommodate the treatment streams that would have to happen on the 2 options. And the 2 options chosen are sort of the 2 most common options at this point. We've ruled out all the abstract stuff so far. Still haven't got our finger on exactly why we went from sort of a $6 to $8 million project to north of $20 million by changing consultants and digging into it farther. And we're going to try and work that back. And in the meantime, it's simply unserviceable. Like it doesn't make any sense to use that water that way for that kind of cost, unless somebody else is paying for it. So the changes to the theory and the costing have to be fully vetted out, and I'm really hoping that the guys working on it right now are just looking at it as, you know, this is sort of contingencies built on contingencies, and it could be. I'm really hoping it's going to be, you know, half of what they say it might be. But yeah, it's going to involve some building. It's not overly substantial. It does not look like $20+ million to me, and we're working on it. So.
Thank you, Councilor Turner.
At the current time, this is for CAO, at the current time, we are taking no water from KenGuard?
We blend about 2% of its available pumping capacity into the system just to keep it viable, so that we're blending the, I'll call it contaminated, but the manganese water with the other water up to the limit of what Interior Health allows us to run as far as the manganese content. So we've got a big well down there with lots of pump capacity that we're just trickling right now to use a bit of.
And without using KenGuard, have we run into water difficulties yet?
As far as what we're noticing from the pumping perspective and it regenerating after significant pumping events, absolutely not. We have had no trouble with recharge at this point. The source water plan that was done a number of years ago as well noted water quality and volumes probably better in the mid aquifer, but the pressures we get from the province and the local community in general is the upper and mid aquifer are tied to the surface of the river, and they very much like us out of there. But at $20 to $30 million, we're not getting out of there. Unless somebody else is paying for it. It's just, it doesn't work. It doesn't map out. So I've got a few ideas. We're still working through that design concept that we funded last year to get us available to pump, to apply for grants. So we have a preliminary design concept bedded out that we can then work on grant money. But at that kind of money, I don't see grants coming in that are going to be overly sustainable for the entire project. So that will leave the whole thing unfunded probably for quite some time. So I believe what the director is asking is, would you want to see this remain in the window of our financial plan? And I believe the decision that is probably prudent at this point is no, it's unaffordable. That we should probably walk away from that, focus on the wastewater treatment plant right now, while we get our ducks in a row and exactly what's going to happen with that.
So is it possible to do, concentrate on the wastewater treatment plant and also add more to our reserve that hopefully could keep up with inflation on? See, it seems to me that every year things just go up and we can't put enough in reserves to keep up with inflation. So if we say, okay, we're going to postpone this for 5 years, what's the cost going to be in 5 years? Will our reserves reflect that? Will our interest reflect that? That's what I'm afraid of.
Well, and we're in a position, very specifically here in Merritt where, average inflation isn't what we're dealing with when it comes to construction costs. If you look at the level of how busy we are and the amount of that industry that is servicing here, prices are high, largely because everybody's working right now and it's really busy. Those are not the times to build infrastructure for a municipality. You want to build infrastructure when the industry is slow and hungry, so they're going to come and bid your jobs really well. So if we do things right now on today's pricing, we're competing with all the developers and all the other big things, even dike work and whatnot, that is, probably overly expensive just based on the immediate need. And you don't want to compete with that. So in the short term, we don't have a water problem. The optics of how we use water, the water metering, the getting a handle on the system better and how we use water is probably more important in the short term, while we work out the fussy part of how we get to using that Can Guard well better. And I got a couple of alternate ideas that I'm going to float out there, which we can talk about at another time, but a little abstract, but that's what I do. So,
Councilor Ogun.
Thank you. So it is clear that all these 3 projects at once are not attainable. So we have to decide which project we are going to be working on. So it's very important to determine the savings rate that was mentioned here, because whether or not we are able to proceed with these projects at this point, we will have to face that one, or the new council will have to do that in future years. So it's important for you answer part of the questions that for Councilor Charney. So the well, it was a huge increase from 7.5 to 20 million right now. The good thing is that we started saving. So if I want to see some projections, when can the city be ready to proceed with a project like the well, if we keep saving at this current saving rate? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
So that's essentially what the second part of our agenda is asking for, is some direction on what you want for options to steepen that curve. So for parcel tax for water and sewer in 2023, we agreed to a 3-year plan where there would be 5% increases. So that's what we've been executing on. At last year's open house on the sewer side, we socialized what 5 and 15% would look like. And really at the end of the 10-year period, it's the difference between having 10 or 20 million towards a wastewater treatment plant. Still debt and grant components, even at 15%. So today, it's helpful to understand where we want to see options and what range of options you want to see. So you could issue direction that you want to see 5% all the way to 25%. You could say 5% to 50%. We provide some tables and views of where we get to at all of those levels. So that's the intention today, is to understand where we want to steepen that savings curve to be able to achieve goals at a certain time in the future. I don't want to bring options forward that I'm not interested in entertaining, so it really is an opportunity today to issue some of that direction.
Councillor Richard.
Later down where you have the long-term planning, you're talking about the wastewater treatment plant, you got 2,700,000. And it's got a tax increase in 22%. Would that be 22% in the water sewer?
So I think I tried to say using the municipal levy equivalency, so that's not the rate on the parcel tax. That's the equivalent of our entire general taxation, just for magnitude, right? So if we're
Okay.
talking on the parcel tax, the percentage may be significantly more than that. I'm just trying to anchor on the materiality of what it takes to service that debt load if we don't increase our savings rates for a period of time.
So if we were essentially just leaving the rates where they were, sewer and the other parcels, you're saying about 22% increase to service the wastewater treatment plant?
Correct. So if we don't save any more beyond the pace that we're currently on, which is 5% a year.
Yeah.
And we assume a grant of 7 million, which comes from the strategic priorities fund of the community building fund. That's
Yeah.
kind of the one big lump where there's no copay with the city if we're a successful applicant. So I've used that as a proxy, which means we're funding out to about 42 million in debt. So if we had to fund that out of general taxation, it would be a 22% increase just to make those debt payments.
And that's just for the one.
And I'm not saying obviously to action that today. We're not borrowing today. We're not actually putting that in the plan. But I present that so that you can give me direction on what you want to see in terms of savings rates. So if that's a number that we aren't interested in, then you can provide direction to say, we'd like to see options that increase beyond the 5% that we're currently doing for the sewer fund. So that's the intention today. It's not that we're actually executing on any of this. It's to help inform the direction on where we're steepening that curve of our reserve building.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Councillor Regan.
Yeah, I've got three questions. So what is the effect of the increased density with all these new apartment buildings, et cetera, being built around town and increased population going to have on our ability to service with our infrastructure?
Your worship, from a water perspective, I believe the number was, last time I checked it, we're using somewhere around 75% of our allocation as far as what we're licensed for. So we're in reasonably good shape there for the growth that's happening right now, that's visible. A fairly large amount of growth is going to cause a bit of strain on the system, obviously down the road. We're a little ways away from that and worrying about that.
And when you say little ways away, how many years are you talking?
I wouldn't expect a lot of issue unless we see a real boom here for 10 years. That said, there are tweaks that we need to do in different areas to create looping and additional pressure and whatnot in water. The sewer side of things, and of course, already in the water, we have a lot of issue with the old infrastructure just as a base. So how much of our, you got to ask the question, how much of our existing usage and pump volume is leaking out of pipes and going into the ground? So as we tighten up the system, as we get into metering and identify how we use the water more, we should be able to slowly reduce our current usage to create more of that cap room up to our allowed amount. And if not, can always apply for more down the road, but that competition with the optics with everybody else sharing water is a tough conversation. The sewer side of things, very similar, except that we've identified a lot of deficiencies in the network that brings the sewage to the plant. And that East Merritt Utility Corridor study that we did, that I do plan to bring to you for information here in the next little while, set the basis for what that might look like. The issue with that plan is it's unaffordable as well, unless we only focus on sewer pipes. So there's a whole stretch of road in there that, you know, the intent would be, you know, pathways and parking and pavement and redoing the whole bit. And with all the other pressures, that is not affordable. But what is affordable is working on a few areas of connecting pipes, upsizing a few pipes in critical areas, and working our way along slowly on the network side of it. The plant itself, the wastewater treatment plant, that is our critical infrastructure problem right now. It's Band-Aids and bubble gum. So,
Okay, so then my next question would have been to both of you, CAO and CFO, is could you estimate the number of years until could we afford to get at that Vanguard well? I don't mean you don't have to do it right now, but I mean, that would be something that I'd be interested in learning.
And so it's linked to the level of how much we're steepening the curve, right? So at 5%, that's a challenging time horizon for executing the project, given that the base water parcel tax is just under 600,000, right? So, we need, 12.5 million potentially in an extreme scenario. I kind of need that range of what we want to see in terms of steepening the curve. So we're at 5%. What options do we want to see? Are we interested in 25? Are we interested in 15? What does that range look like over the next few years? So getting that sense allows me to then present where we get to at the end of a 5 and 10 year period at that level. And then we can assess whether or not the residual amount would be reasonable from a debt perspective.
Okay. And then what is the Public Works opinion on what our priorities should be in terms of water treatment, wells, water?
well,
sewage?
the Vanguard well to me is future water security. We're not having supply issues right now. We have water. Everything's working fine on that end. We tighten the system up. We use a little bit less water through metering, et cetera. That buys us a fair bit of time, 10, 20 years potentially. But Vanguard and anything in the deep aquifer is the future of security of water that we have to be cognizant of. So we're running that process right now to try and get the definition into what we need to do, get it priced out, hopefully quite a bit tighter, and then work on how we're going to pay for it later, once we know a little bit more about exactly how it goes together. The wastewater treatment plant, we're running very close to capacity on that for how it's outfit right now. The process stream should be changed to a centrifuge instead of the press that we're running. There's some operational changes. We've had some flood issues there during the flood with electrical rooms being underground. So we did have a master plan done. And I think you see most of those numbers in the next number of years through the financial plan of the last report we had said, do this, this, and this, and this based on how critical things are. What we're trying to do right now is we're going back to the consultants and we're asking them to help us build a plan of how we're going to get there. Because we have to continue to operate while we implement these things. So the money in the plan for that wastewater treatment plant, in my opinion, should remain a priority. How we get there, it might be 8 years out, we save, we implement some combined projects, because how do we operate and tear it all apart at the same time? There's got to be a plan how it goes together. That plan should be available to me by spring of 2026, because we're just getting consultants on it right now, how we implement doing it. But I would say that's our biggest infrastructure need right now, is the end of the rainbow on wastewater, which is the plant itself. Pipes, they're easy. Sewer pipe surcharges, your ankles get a little bit wet. It's not the end of the world, right? Pipe breaks, you can fix a pipe. You do that under maintenance. The big ticket stuff, that plant goes down, we're not processing sewage. We either have to dump direct to the river with a bunch of heavy chlorine and then dechlorination, or, right, we evacuate the town because we can't remove sewer. I mean, it's pretty critical stuff.
Mm-hmm. But I'm just thinking I had the reason why I asked these questions is that's going to be tough for council to know exactly how to recommend percentage increases unless we know the actual how critical everything is and how many. I think we want to be able to put it into a timeline that we can visualize, with the exception of, the unforeseeable.
Yeah. The wastewater treatment plant, I would say, is sub 5 years, getting very critical. We've got a good crew of guys over there holding it together. We're doing a few things that have been lagging behind for a while that have had the Band-Aids on them. So a pipe here and that there, but even the tanks and stuff, they're starting to show a lot of wall decay. It's getting rough over there. And these are all things that will impact its operation. My personal feeling is we're going to end up in a position because of growth as well, where we end up with a separate new stream, get things operating on that, and go back and rehab the other one for the increase that we do need for growth. So another smaller one of similar size, right? It's the only way I see it working, but that's why I'm going to the industry to give us an idea of how we're going to be able to implement this. And even if it's over a number of years, it makes sense to do this, this, and this, and this in this order while we operate. That's what I'm hoping to get from them. A little easier for us to plan the more critical stuff that showed up in the report that are in the early years of the plan that we've deferred the last couple of years. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Counselor Cherney.
With the new, I'm going to jump on what Councillor Egan was saying. We have new apartments coming in. We've got Bell, we've got Mako, and a few other things in the boiler. Is it possible to take some of their taxation money and put it directly into reserves for both the wastewater treatment and Kengar without harming the budget? Is it possible to increase the reserves? That's what I'm trying to say.
Certainly.
And still putting a priority of probably on the wastewater treatment.
So we can start differentiating when we're talking about the municipal tax increase in terms of the tax increase that gets applied to the base, which is all the existing properties, and then what that impact from development or non-market change would be. So when we're setting the mill rates, we would set it such that the tax increase on the base is what a council agrees should be the increase. And then when the mill rate is applied against the additional assessed value, that creates an opportunity for some savings. So council can issue direction as we get into section 2 as to what priorities would be where you want it built into the base in which everyone is contributing, and what priorities you would want for on-market change or development type activity, recognizing that there's no guarantee as it relates to the development impact. So 2023, it was a net $5,000 for the city. It wasn't overly material whether you ran the tax increase against the base or against the total assessment goal. But to your point, as we see some of these activities occurring throughout the city, there is an expectation that the non-market change or development activity may result in something more material than that going forward. And so it's prudent to start differentiating between increase on the base versus overall increase.
And where are the residual dikes? Which ones are they?
The residual deck?
Yeah, residual diking. Well, that's everything right now.
So I guess I'll make a few comments on that. So obviously our base case is that federal and provincial funding are funding diking required along the Coldwater River. That is the base case. And I'm not suggesting that we put anything in the plan related to that. But from an overall strategic and risk perspective, as we're thinking about debt, it may be prudent to leave enough borrowing room such that future councils have the option, if we aren't successful in obtaining the remaining federal and provincial funding, to have the option of completing the diking infrastructure such that it's a contiguous system all along the corridor. So it's about trying to think about how much room we need to leave maybe in our borrowing capacity just to manage that risk that we're not able to obtain senior level of government funding for it.
So the number that you're seeing there, Councillor Charney, is what we have left to get 100% coverage.
So that's from
That'd be from the Middlesbrough Bridge all the way up to
the far end.
the east end.
Yeah.
So right now, I'm working with ROC to put a thing together where Frank Caputo, myself, and Dan Albus present the Prime Minister with their DMAF reapplication with the application that was denied, and pointing out the fact that the provincial government has helped us to $160 million. They have helped us to 2 million. They made promises, so we're going to go after that 30. So right now that 30 is what we need. But at this point, I don't think the city would be looking at funding the 30 million.
No.
We would expect the federal government to step forward because, to be honest with you, that's a drop in the bucket for them. And they haven't done anything except $2 million from the Green Artem funding. And that's not acceptable. So that is kind of a line that we're working on right now. So hopefully with the two MLAs or the two MPs and the reactivation, we can actually get them to kick in. So it's going to be an embarrassment factor. There's no other way of putting it. Embarrass them. So. Oh, Councilor Rogan, you had your light on and then it went off. Oh, if it comes back, let us know. Councilor Charney, are you done?
Just return to Councillor Egan's comments and questions, if that's okay. So in terms of the actual capital or financial plan for the wastewater treatment plant, in 2023, we removed all the capital out because we didn't have the funding for it on the condition that we start saving in terms of the reserves. The capital associated with the plant doesn't currently appear in that 5-year window. At the open house last year, we showed 5% increases for 10 years and 15% increases for 10 years. And basically that resulted in 10 million at 5% and 20 million at 15%. So if we need, up to 42 million in principal, it gives you that sense of what might be required in terms of a percentage and timeline to achieve even half that goal. So 15% would be a scenario that takes 10 years just to get to the halfway point without debt. Notion.
That's right.
So when we're talking about the 5%, is that just, say 15? Would that just be on the residential parcel? Because it used to be somewhere in the 200 for a single family home, I think, for sewer parcel. I think last year it was what, 220 or something?
Yeah, so it would have been $220.50 last year because we've been doing the 5% increases.
So
Water
then-
would have started at 160, gone to 168, and I believe it was 176.40 last year.
Okay,
Or this year.
roughly, yeah. So then 220, we would just tack on 15% to that if we went 15 instead of the 5?
Correct. So if council issued direction that they want to see what that looks like in terms of savings over a period of time at 15%, then we can present that as part of the budgeting process. And then that helps inform what bylaws we bring forward for 2026. Certainly, that's why we're here today, is to give me that sense of what you're open to having me present.
I think if people knew that we were especially putting that in for the wastewater treatment plan, and we either had it as a line item on the tax bill or just had it at the budget presentations, I think it's reasonable, because on 220, that's about 33 per household. But at least some people know that we're essentially saving for the treatment plant in 10 years. But thanks for that answer. Certainly.
Any other questions as it relates to long-term debt? Okay, so let's get into reserves. So when we kicked off the budgeting process, Councillor Charney, you had mentioned it might be helpful to look at where we are currently in terms of our reserve position. So the table essentially tries to summarize what's in our financial statements as at year-end 2024, and then bring in some of the budgetary adjustments that would have occurred in 2025 to have a pro forma view, both in terms of contribution and use. Some of the uses will have changed as we progress through the year. For example, we've deferred the mechanical room at the pool to next year. So we're not using the gas tax reserve to fund that this year. It'll be funded next year. So there will be some movements in the use side of the equation, but notionally it gives you that sense of where we are in 2025 for making decisions. So we've had some conversation about water and sewer. Ultimately, we can establish what that range of increases might look like, or what we might be open to. That would be helpful. And then if there's any other reserves that we want to consider in the budgeting process, So for example, Parks and Rec last year, we started with 1%. So 113,274 went into reserves for parks and recreational facilities in 2025. That's an area where you might want to provide some direction as to, are we happy at that level? Do we want options at 2%? Do we want options at 3%, etc.? So based on your priorities and where you'd like to see us investing for the future, if there's areas outside of water and sewer that you'd like to provide some direction on, that would be helpful so I know what to bring forward to.
Mike? What do you think? Councillor Egan?
Yeah, I think we need direction on the fire trucks.
Well, I
Yeah.
think the direction on the fire trucks comes when they actually tell us we have to buy one. Because their
We
pumping
still have
capacity,
to have enough in the reserves though.
because the pumping capacity is what dictates when we need a new truck. And this has always been my concern, is it's just one group that tells us this. So we also have to see what happens with that apartment building, how many floors it is. If it goes to 6 floors, we don't have a ladder that can reach that.
I thought the discussion was that they thought they could push it.
But we'll have to see if the underwriters accepts that.
Yeah.
'Cause if underwriter says no, then we have to buy a new truck.
Okay, so would the building, because they're the only building that's forcing a city to buy such a truck, would have to contribute to that? No?
Well, I'm sure that, you know, I'd like to say yes, but no. We just issued the permitting.
So currently, right now, we're able to fund the deposit that's required out of general reserves, but the truck's being financed with debt in our current financial plan.
Okay, always then.
It is,
Okay.
yeah, both engine 2 and the ladder truck. So for example, the ladder truck, the new terms that we're looking at is a 10% deposit in 2026. And it's a 48 to 51 month lead time to actually have it delivered. So we can fund the deposit next year out of reserves, but we can't actually fund the entire 3 million cost. That's premised as debt, both in last year's plan and currently would be premised as debt in the new plan. Same thing for engine 2, which we're waiting on and has been in progress over the last few years. So both trucks are premised as being debt financed other than the deposit.
And what will change, Councillor Egan, is the fact that we used to give those engines away. We won't be doing that anymore. We'll put them up for sale. Now, we're not going to make a ton of money off of them, but there is some return coming from that. So we no longer give our stuff away. So, Councillor Trey.
I've got a couple of things. Kevin, can you differentiate, like you're saying, okay, we have the down payment. And then we have, what, 5 years, 4 years to come up with the rest. Why do you call it debt? Why do you not call it money going into reserve? Or do we have to pay for that truck?
So we're premising borrowing from MFA in 2030 to fund the remaining 2.7 million out of the 3
Okay,
as it stands today. So we have general and restricted reserves that you see in front of you that could fund the 300,000 deposit next year. But we're premising making principal and interest payments starting. Last year, we thought we could have the truck by 2029. The lead time just gets worse and worse. 48 to 51 months now means that it'll be 2030 before the truck is actually operational and delivered. So we'll shift the debt payments to MFA in the plan to 2030.
And
But we're
how-
premising actually using a 5-year equipment financing term to fund that truck.
how much we putting per year into reserve for the trucks?
We're not currently
No.
saving anything really towards fire trucks. So the contributions we're making is about 1.5%. So we started out doing about 50,000 for self-contained breathing apparatus. And we thought we could do that over a 10-year period to fund that 500,000 replacement. Last year, we added the 1% towards the fire department, which could certainly go towards like a deposit or whatnot, but it's not enough to actually build in time funds for our truck replacement. We would have to really get aggressive in the reserve contributions to avoid a borrowing scenario.
Okay.
Certainly we can present that option if council's interested in looking at what that would take to have funds ready by 2030. It's just it's tough when we were starting at zero to come up with that money near term. So engine 2 is 2 million, the ladder truck is 3. Getting 5 million put together in a short time would be very punitive on a tax increase when we were already doing double digits, just trying to balance the operational side, right? So we would need like $1 million a year towards the trucks, and that's notionally 10%. That would be challenging to execute on. But if it's an option you're interested in, we can bring it forward. But essentially the debt payments then just go into the tax rate, and that it's part of our general levy in the year that the principal and interest payments start.
So I have a question. This tariff situation, have we calculated any, because 90% of this truck is going to come from the States. So the frame comes from one company, the body comes from another, the engine comes from another, the tires come from another. Most of them are all in the States. Have we talked about a tariff situation, or do we know anything on that? Or would we calculate for that at least? I mean, we're probably talking 30%.
They started premising a little bit of risk there, and then there was some credits with the vendor and a pullback in that amount. I think we're seeing a little bit of that conversation as it relates to solid waste vehicles, but we haven't tracked anything that anchors us on just how much that impact may be right now.
Councillor Egan.
I think I would be interested in seeing, I mean, right now, is it all just 1% that we're putting in each of these reserves? I can't remember.
No, I can go through certainly of any of
And
the
then
ones of
what would
interest.
it look like if we went to like up a couple of percents for each? What would it look like over 5 years?
So give me maybe the list of ones that you might be interested in, 1%, 2%, or 3% for. Are we thinking more like Parks and Rec and fire and?
No, not so much Parks and Rec. I'm thinking water, sewer, fire. Maybe climate.
So fire, we're currently doing about 1.5% essentially. What would be the range that you would want to see?
Well, even if we just increased it 1% to go to 2.5 or to go to 3%. But what would the difference be?
Okay.
And I'm thinking for the taxpayer, right? And when we look at this, when we say 1%, are we still looking at $100,000?
Mhm.
Yeah, so prior year would have been 113,274 for the 1%. We'll have to adjust that number given that we've got a new 2025 starting point.
Yeah.
So in terms of
Yes,
water
go ahead.
sewer, we've talked about ranges 5 to 15, getting us to about the halfway point after at the end of 20 years. Where are we interested in seeing for those two reserves? And we can differentiate them too. One can be more aggressive than the other as it relates to priorities. So with the wastewater treatment plant being a top infrastructure priority, you might want to ask for a more aggressive range on that and maybe scale back on the water range just to have them offsetting. That's a direction of council.
Councillor Hogan.
I'm having a hard time coming up with recommendations for the savings rate. I just don't want to suggest something without knowing how long it's going to take me. First of all, I need to understand what we need to achieve. So fire, are we talking about just the 2 trucks that we are trying to replace? So if we add the 3% from 1.5 to 3%, so I need to understand how long it's going to take us to be able to achieve that amount. So I know that you are trying to get this recommended savings rate from us. But for me, I need to understand what we have right now, how far that current savings rate is going to take me, and from them make decisions on, okay, so now if we increase 2% in each one of them, so this is how how faster we are gonna be achieving our goal, but also the impact that is going to have in our residents. So that's the main importance. That's great. I'm having a hard time coming up with any amounts now.
We need to
Yeah.
know.
You-
Come up with that. Sorry.
Well, hold on a second.
Yeah,
Let's
that's-
let-
I agree with you, Councillor Hogan, that you need to know how far the current percentage is taking us to get to where we want to go with some of these very important improvements. And if you know, if we increase it to 2% or 3%, how fast it will grow in order to get there. But then you have to take it into consideration inflation as well as everything else.
That's Richard.
With all the savings and different pieces that we have, non-tax revenue seems to be a way that maybe we can get there without affecting the citizens. So if we were to have the housing plan where we had rental income coming from a society, would that income then go into the general fund? Or would it have to be in its own fund only for housing? Could we use?
So housing currently is set up as a separate fund similar to water and sewer, just from a
Okay.
governance perspective with the province.
So if we had a city-owned project that was generating revenue for the city, could we put some of the revenue into the general fund so that we could help use that to fund our fire trucks and fund the other increases needed for maybe wastewater treatment? I do know that we have separate reserves for those, but could we use the revenue from that, or would it have to stay in housing?
So it would be a conversation with the province to understand what's permissible if we're using treasury board funds, what they'll accept.
Okay, because I just thought if we had sold some of the mobile home units and then had it into a housing unit, if we can use some of that revenue is what I was thinking, not necessarily directly. Well, I guess it would be if it was revenue, but
No, I do believe in, maybe somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but once the process of those mobile homes have run through, that's no longer a housing fund that we have to be aware of because that was paid for. We went through the 2 years. When we sell them, that becomes our money to do with as we wish. And that's my understanding. We no longer are connected to the province on any decisions making after that. That's why we have the situation where we have to sell them. That's a part of the deal. So I think once that's done, that revenue can, whether we sell them, rent them out, that revenue can be kind of deposited between several things or wherever we'd like it to go. Because that's my understanding of the deal is the situation that becomes our money to do with what we wish.
well, water is restricted, sewer is restricted, everything's restricted. So I thought if we were able to transfer some of the money from the housing fund into the general, if we can use it for allocating it to different
Yeah,
pieces.
so the housing fund that we had now was created because there was an overpayment for the trailers that never got used. So once I think that the whole 2 year cycle has passed and we've fulfilled our obligations as far as the housing, I don't believe there's any stipulations that's attached to it after that. Because we haven't seen any if there is. I haven't seen anything that says there is. It's just the fact that this has to be done by December 31st, 2025, done, and we walk away. Now, we offered the trailers back to the province and they said, no, thank you. So, and they could have said, well, by the way, here's some stipulations on those. They didn't. They just simply said, it's your problem to deal with. There we go. So I think that's where we're at on that.
Might be best case scenario.
Yeah, it might be.
I'll just quickly return to maybe trying to reframe the conversation. It's less a little bit about percent and number of years. Tell me about your goals and let me work what the percentage in years it would take to achieve a goal. So if you wanted to characterize it as we would like to be able to fund 50% of our fire truck out of reserves and 50% from debt, that could be a goal of council, just as an example, right? So if you could frame it in terms of a goal, it allows me to figure out what path might get to that goal and then allow you to see that impact on the taxation side for decision making. So if that's helpful, think about it in terms of what you'd want to
Would it, since this is,
achieve.
this is beginning steps of the budget, would this be a prudent situation where we may have the chief address us on what the concerns are, not only just with the fire trucks, but I'm sure Scott Air packs are going to be coming up soon, some of them. I'm sure there's other things that are going to be wearing out, hoses especially, et cetera. I think we are going to have a situation where we are going to have a meeting with all of the directors as we move forward with their wishes. Now, the way we used to do the budget is we would get each director would give us, this is what I need and this is what I'd like to have. And they focused on what the need was, not what I want, but what I need. I'd like to see us come back to that again. And that way we can look at it and it has all of the breakdown on it, exactly what it would cost, where it would come from, et cetera. And that's what we got. I mean, wanting something is great, but it's what do you need? So, yeah, that's,
We'll have that update available. We're working that with each director right now. So for example, some of the hoses requirements, we've identified a grant stream for 30,000 that you'll see as part of the budget presentation. And then that doesn't have to come out of the reserve that we're saving for the self-contained breathing apparatus. So you'll have all those updates as we progress through the budgeting cycle.
that's even.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also that once we receive those lists, then we can actually have a conversation about it because it's not about what we want to see. It's what the city needs. You know, what each department needs and what their priorities are.
And we have several conversations with CAO in his other role where he says things like, we might be able to come up with a different way to do something to get us some time. I'm just curious if the chief can do the same thing. Does he see things differently, right? So I would just like to get his input on this.
That's great. Yeah.
So, but we will actually have that at some point where we talk to all the directors with their dreams and wishes and hopes and all the rest of that stuff.
Of course, as we discussed in our process kickoff, the directors are going to have to be prepared to present. I might provide some opening comments, but each director will be in front of you to discuss both their operational side and their capital priorities as we get closer to December.
It's good.
Councillor Charney?
But today, did you want us to give direction as to what it would look like if we put so much aside in reserves? Is that what direction you need for
Just
today?
hoping to understand what pools might be. So like, for example, if we return to the wastewater treatment plant and we look at the funding that was maybe required out of debt. So I think we were at 42 million. If you wanted a goal where we saved even half of that and the other half was debt, you could say, what would it take in terms of savings to get to 21 million? And I could give you some percent and timeline combinations that got you to that goal. It's going to be more than the 5% that we're on today. And so that's what I'm hoping to get that sense as to how much we're open to steepening that curve.
Could we give you two figures or is that too much?
You can give me whatever you would like to
Sure,
see.
Kevin can handle two figures.
Well, what I'm saying is, could we have a 50% and a 25%?
Of the
That's
42
my
million?
feeling. What is it?
Yeah.
I would like to see where it is and where else we could cut back to add to that. I think it's going to be a juggle. I think we have to really juggle. It's not just straightforward. We can't keep spending. We have to, eventually the rubber's going to hit the mat, right? So we've got to do something now.
Certainly. And so for context, if we're talking about the 42 million for the wastewater treatment plant, the 5% increases we're doing today over 10 years get us to about 10, 11 million. So that is 25% of the amount. The remainder would be debt. So that's essentially the pace that we're on today. 50% is probably about 15% increases in sewer parcel tax to get to that 20-ish range over a 10-year period, right? But framing it in terms of a goal like that is helpful for me to understand what to bring forward.
And I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that we've taxed pretty hard for 2 years. So I think we need to be aware of where we're going here because there's 115 homes for sale in town right now. So 55, sorry.
And I'll also frame it in terms of how much the actual amount will be on the bill, right?
Yep.
So going
Sure.
5% for water was 168 to 176.40. It was $8, right? So it might sound like 5%, but it's the equivalent of $8 for every household and business. So I can give you both of those for decision making.
Councillor Baxter.
So the wastewater treatment plant, I've been there a couple of times now, and I know it's just bandages and gum. So what is our end of life? Like it's already at its end of life. How many years can we sustainably keep it running without it collapsing? So that way we can at least have an idea of how much money we need to save in the short term so that we don't get screwed over.
Thank you. We'll have a lot better information come spring when I get through this feasibility implementation study that I'm trying to put it all together on. That said, little changes if necessary, if something catastrophically breaks. You've got a hit right now to fix that thing, right? If you have another flood that gets into the electrical system and wipes everything out, then it's much more catastrophic. But thinking in terms of all of this stuff is just mechanical and electrical, everything can be repaired, but we have to operate at the same time. So lead time on once something breaks, what is it? We don't have spare ones sitting in stock. We don't have a spare sewer plant that we can just start pulling parts off of. So now you're waiting for parts. That wait period is probably the most significant thing in all of this, is how long does it take to identify what we have to replace, get it here, get it in a time frame where we can still provide services. That makes sense? So I'm less worried about any individual thing breaking, and I'm worried about how long it takes to get it back to working. Right? So the guys have been really good about MacGyvering things, yes, right? There's a limit to that. I think we're probably, if we're focused in that direction, in that 8 to 10 year range, we should be fresh and new, I would hope, because we're running a lot of risk there. But it doesn't mean that any individual thing can't be fixed. If we do more preventative maintenance and we do a little bit more forecasting, we can predict what might break and maybe get ourselves into the stream of ordering something before there's catastrophic failure rather than running things to failure. It's difference in philosophy and how it's run. Everything has been by and large, run it till failure, shut it down until we can fix it. The wells have been like that. We had that in the last year. Collettville well went down and it just sat there until there was money, right? So.
And then when we had the pipe break at the pump house, I mean, it was like 4 or 5 days before we could actually get that fixed because I had to source the parts and the gasket and everything out, and that took a while. And then the
Yeah, and that
electrical
was the
got
easy
nailed.
stuff.
Yeah.
The UV stuff that goes into that they were taking parts off of different stuff, trying to get something working. We get lucky on that stuff on occasion, probably more often than not. But that's always a risk. You're managing risk with this, right? And the risk is if we can't process the sewer, then we have a problem.
Councilor Rogan?
Thank you. So when we dealt with the tax increase, CFO presented some scenarios, how we were considering other percentages and the impact that this percentage were going to have in different areas. So would that, just a thought, would that be possible to create an Excel spreadsheet where we can just manage? Right now, the base savings rate is 5%. So I don't think that 15% is achievable, attainable. I don't think that we can go that high. But if we just consider the from 6% to 10%, how the reserve could be affecting. So how many reserves do we have? I don't know. So how many reserves we should start that we don't have right now? So if we just aim for the between 5 or 6 to 10% increase, so that we can see the impact that we will have, and like Councillor Baxter said, so we need to understand the lifespan of that specific project. We need to understand the need of that in the well. When do we need that well? It's ready for operating, and so that we can have a good idea of what percentage we need to work on for this specific fiscal budget season.
I agree. I think the other thing that we should do, and one of the things that I usually like to do when we start, is what are we looking at as our final goal as a percentage to the community? Like, where are we willing to go? Now, we've done 12.0 or 12.5 and 11.5, right? So that's 24% 2 years.
Or something in the.
So,
Yes.
so, I mean, we've sold that as a council very well, and we because we've explained through staff and on open houses why we did this, and people understood why we were doing it. I think to come back and go, you know what, this year will probably be 10%. I think that's a little bit crazy. I think for myself, I would like to see us around 6%. I would be happy with that. Now you look at Vancouver, who's talking about 0%. It's $100 million they got to find. Good luck with that. But I mean, I think we should understand what we're willing to support, because we've asked them for 2 years, and I think at this point in time, we need to start giving the citizens a bit of a break as we move forward here. So, I mean, that's just me, Councillor Baxter.
I understand that from your point, Mayor. I think what we need from Kevin is 10%, 9%, 8%, 6%, 5%. So that way we can, and what services we can lose at each of those percentages. So that way we can juggle it, because we're, like, I already know that we're gonna go up probably higher than 6%. Because we need to fund services that are gonna keep our community sustainable, and it's gonna be hard. It's not gonna be like a joyride, but we need to know where each of those hits and what we're gonna lose, so that way we can make sure that we make the right choices for our citizens.
So what we've done in the past, sometimes when we've been in like a Saturday session, we have had the spreadsheet that Councillor Olgan has suggested. The CFO of the day would then add, they had a baseline, and every time we made a change, that was added, and it all trickled all the way down to the bottom, and we could see exactly where we were. Then we could go back and say, you know what, that doesn't work, let's go over here. All the way down it would go. And sometimes it was frightening. And other times it was like, it's a lot of work. I mean, that's an 8-hour session, just, which I have no problems doing on Saturdays. But I think in order for us to be where you're correct, we would need to see all of it. But I agree with the spreadsheet situation, because it does automatically calculate. Councillor Charney.
I really would like to see every reserve fund that we have, where we are and what our target percentage is.
So where we are today is presented in the table.
Yeah, I didn't get those ones.
Target is based on
Yeah.
goals of council. So that's what I'm hoping to get.
Okay, but I'd like to see projected, like, is there going to be an increase each year, et cetera? I forgot what else I was gonna say.
We'll probably come back to you.
It might-
So we've talked a little bit about water and sewer and possible ranges that you're interested in entertaining. We've talked a little bit about fire department. Is there anything that you need to see in terms of transportation or parks and rec? Those are the other two main areas, but I just need to understand where we're at with this cycle.
Parks and Rec, with the rec committee that we had, was a fair increase last year. So I think at this point in time, Parks and Rec, I mean, we'll meet again with that crew. They've been pretty quiet about things, so I'm not really sure there's a huge Parks and Rec needs to really be, I'm sure we need to do normal, but we're talking about a new diamond and new this and new that. We talk about everything, right? So I think the wastewater treatment plant is our top situation, because it was damaged in the flood. We know that some life was taken off of it. So, and with the dike system that we have, as we are moving along on Dike 129 and 130, we're creating a bathtub, and the drain is basically going to be the city works yard if we don't get the rest of the funding towards the east end. We're just going to create a giant bathtub. So, you're correct. As the CAO says, without sewer, being able to manage the sewer, we can't live here. So we know it's come to its end. So for myself, I think that would be my main focus for me, would be the wastewater, and trickle down from that. I mean, of course, we have to take into fire, because we don't want fire not to be able to, do correctly without somebody getting injured. Councillor Rogan.
I share the same priorities as you, Mayor. I just feel that at some point the water plant was not a priority in past councils, because it was maybe newer, it was working properly, but if they had started a reserve, we wouldn't be in the position that we are right now. So I know that Parks and Rec may not be a priority, but if we are able to review it and have some slight increase, it will help us in the future council.
Are you talking about the Ken Guard well?
No, and the water is working.
Yeah, because the Ken Guard well, when it first came in, when we finished it off in 2008, when it came in here, IHA was happy with the water quality, and they said, you're good to go. So we didn't move anything past that. I'm not sure what has changed in that amount of time because we were actually using it for quite some time. We ran it out in the field there for about 3 or 4 or 5 days. And IHA gave us a clean bill of health and off we went. So, CO?
Yes, thank you. I believe there's been some changes to the limits on the manganese that have come over the last few years. It went from just an aesthetic to an actual requirement now.
Okay.
So there has been some change.
For the worst,
Pardon me?
for the worst for us.
Well, it means we have to treat for it because it now becomes a pass and fail rather than just an aesthetic, right?
So I recognize that we're getting a little bit tight on time and we have committee of the whole as well. Is it possible to transition to council priorities as it relates to service level decisions and any capital priorities? So as we talk about what it might take to get down from 10% to 6%, you know, last year we had 26 packages. We talked about options. What do we want to see in terms of level of service discussion for this cycle? So I'm aware of the summer camp coming forward as part of the community services presentation as an example. And I'm on the capital side, aware of the senior center ceiling as a priority that wouldn't have been in last year's plan. What other priorities of council do you need to have us bring discussion back?
Well, we have to talk about a correct fencing for Spirit Square. We can't leave the temporary fencing up forever. We have to, I believe Spirit Square, because we're talking downtown revitalization, that's where it has to start. So we have to talk about some sort of a permanent fencing situation. We talked about cameras and lights as well. So that has to come in the conversation. And then whatever damage has been done there, because I know the building has been damaged. We have talked about, you know, through the walk that we remove some things and put others in. There's some stuff that no longer makes any sense for it to be there, like the benches, you know, plant trees, make shade. We also have to talk about, in order to use that facility correctly, we have to have some sort of a sunshade situation where we can actually use it, because it's just far too hot in the summer for anybody to use it correctly. So, and then that's kind of the start for us as far as downtown revitalization. Now, we have talked about other things such as the arena being sponsored out by a group, and that group has come forward and asked if we would. So that's something we can possibly look at, is sponsoring out the arena, sponsoring out the pool on a 5-year situation. You know, that's money for us to help those buildings, you know, with some help. So we've talked about that, but that's just me. Councilor Regan?
Yes, and the other thing that was spoken about was to determine the actual physical condition of the CPO office.
You want to take that one, Sam?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I've asked Director of Community Services to go back and do a hazardous materials investigation to find out what we're dealing with onto premises of either a demolition or a restoration. So we can get an idea of what we're dealing with that's bad in there and what it would take to either get things ready to demolish or get things remediated to the point where we carry on restoring and getting use back to it. So that'd be the first step, finding out what we have. Right now, we know air quality has mold in it, and the recommendation is to have PPE when you're in the building, breathing the air. That's visible, and that's a confirmed test. It's coming from someplace. Maybe we have other things. Maybe there's asbestos. Let's find out everything before we start talking about, are we going to rip it down? Are we going to build on top of it? Or are we going to restore it? That buys us a bit of time, make some good decisions, and then decide where we're going.
Okay, good.
Any other priorities of council that you need to have us bring forward? Okay. Well, I'll close out with a little bit of conversation and we can,
Well, I
this
guess
isn't a one-shot deal, so it's.
I get the other thing that we'll probably have to talk about, Kevin, is now that the dike is almost complete at Claybanks RV, we have to decide what happens now with the dike there. What are we allowed to build there? You know, we've lost, I think, 14 sites total with the flood. But now, as you look at the dike, there's some ability to do something with that diking top. What do we do with that? Do we, you know, there's mentions of maybe putting some yurts in or just have it as tenting. We've also talked about developing the other side, the overflow side, do we start moving into that before the diking is done, or do we wait, sort of thing? So I think we have to have a conversation on what Claybanks looks like as we move forward now that the diking is becoming complete on that one, so. And I think the other thing we have to talk about too a little bit is about the airport, because there has been fuel damage for over the years from helicopters. Again, the airport, the 4 planes that are up there, maybe only one flies. I get that. But we do have a lot of traffic from out of town. So we have to have some look at what the airport runway is severely cracking on the sides. And not that we're going to jump all into that, but we do have the light flights that come in here and other things. But the tarmac has taken a beating, an absolute beating, and dropping the kerosene on it has not helped at all. Helicopter companies are great to be here, but they don't care about our airport, and they leave us a problem every time. So
Certainly CAO is well aware and has built
Yeah.
that into his plan, so that will come forward for council consideration.
Councilor Egan?
I'm sorry, I have to.
Oh, okay. Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep, if you have to hit her, guys, hit her, because you got to be back in a very short
I'll
amount of
just
time.
make a few very quick comments to close out on risks, just to make sure we're updated on that. So province-wide pipelines have been revalued by PC assessment. So this doesn't just impact City of Merritt, it is a provincial-wide revaluation. Our impact is about a $2 million reduction in assessed value, which translates into a hit on our taxes of over $70,000. Class 2 utilities are capped at $40 mill rate by provincial legislation. So there is no ability to recoup those funds from other utility properties in the community, which means that taxation revenue will shift to the residences and businesses. So that's an additional headwind that we see over and above debt financing costs, wage, union agreements, et cetera, on the inflationary side. And it's just that challenge that we have to be aware of in getting back to that targeted 6%. Doesn't mean that we're not going to find a path to that, but it's just one more thing that adds another percent that we have to somehow overcome as we work through the process. So I just need council to be aware of that, because I was notified of that a couple of weeks ago. And then we don't have anything further on class 4 as it relates to our major industrial properties in town, but we're aware that there's potential risks in the future of taxation revenue as it relates to the property. Nothing's been communicated in terms of any revaluations or whatnot, but it's just one of those things that we need to be aware of as we plan for the 5-year cycle, that there's a risk there.
So Kevin, have we satisfied the RCMP retro pay over the last 2 years?
So we wrote the check, I believe, March 31st of this year to clear the big lump, like the $500,000 lump. So that was cleared. I think that there's a smaller one that also had to be paid, but the $500,000 settlement was settled earlier this year.
We never saw that one coming either, so it just was deposited on us. Nice to get retroactive pay.
Lots of headwinds that we need to find a path to mitigate as we work through the process. Just needed to update council on the utility one in particular, because that adds a percent that we now have to go find.
Yep.
Okay, I'll leave it there unless there's any other closing comments or questions, so that we're ready for 6 o'clock.
Council, anyone? Thank you. So recommendation that the October 7th, 2025 report from the Director of Finance and Human Resources entitled 2026-2030 financial plan be received for information. Councillor Etchart, Councillor Hogan, all those in favor? Opposed, carried. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, staff. I'm just gonna leave my stuff here.